Well, thank you very much for coming. If you're not aware, if you've not been in the museum before, my name is Sharon Grace. I'm on the board and in charge of the lecture series in those lines. So today, John Staley, who is very involved in the museum, and Daryl Braley, who is the under sheriff, are going to talk about lake rescue and all the different kinds of crafts and what that entails. So without further ado, I'll let them take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm John Staley. My wife Maureen and I live across the street over there, and I'm from Bemis forever. And past fire chief of Bemis Fire Department and past deputy fire coordinator for the county. And that's kind of like my background, and plus working in the Lawson Center here. I thought it'd be good to have the topic of emergency services, boats and equipment, and the history of that on the lake. And so I asked Daryl Braley, who's under sheriff of the Sheriff's Department, also member of Savannah Fire Department. Daryl's been just water rescue and dive team and the boats, and so it's always been a real pleasure to work with Daryl. There just seems to be something about when an incident happens on water that is haunting or more terrifying, even because it happens on water, and it makes it a special incident that we have to handle. And one of the things that we've noticed over the years is that the public, when we have an incident on the water, the public has become very aware of that, and you see that a lot, and there's a lot of folks that are interested in supporting us in a lot of different ways, and lending whatever assistance they can. But it's, I think it's because, you know, the lake is something that everybody loves and everybody uses it. So it just seems like it's a little more difficult sometimes to handle a situation that has to do with water. Because of the way our county is laid out, we all know that Chautauqua Lake and the other bodies of water, we have a tremendous amount of water. And we're just as responsible for the bodies of water in Chautauqua County as we are our buildings for fires or our law enforcement on lands. The different fire departments and police agencies work closely together. We have had a signed mutual aid agreement in Chautauqua County since 1957, a written agreement where we all help each other. One department will have a certain type of equipment, and another department will try not to duplicate that. They'll buy something else that we can use on the scene. So we do a lot of sharing. And even Bemis Point Fire District, which you know how it's formed, we have a lot of water that borders that. And you take a fire department, say DeWittville Fire Department. Well, DeWittville doesn't necessarily have a lot of fires, but yet they have a large shoreline, and DeWittville has taken the lead in providing a lot of water, in particular ice rescue. We have the lake divided into zones, and we have in Chautauqua County a very good state-of-the-art dispatch center. So if a call comes in, and let's say that it's a capsized boat, when that caller calls in, that dispatcher is simultaneously dispatching fire departments in that area. They're dispatching sheriff boats, they're dispatching the dive team. The dive team is a combination of sheriff deputies and volunteer firefighters. And so all those are getting dispatched all at once. Bing, 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 bing. And it's a very quick dispatch so that everybody's coming quickly. And those are all predetermined, pre-planned situations. It just isn't in the summertime. Our responsibilities are the same in the wintertime. And in a lot of ways, it's more complicated when there's ice on the lake. it's interesting. These are minutes from starting in 1920, January 7, 1920. And the past chief of a long time ago, Vic Norton, had a boat livery down here just this side of Lenhart Hotel. And he took the liberty of taking out of the village minute things that related to the fire department. Some of this stuff is hilarious. So this is from February 27, 1920. The village of Bemis, the village board has granted a petition to organize a fire company for the protection of lives and property in the village. And it goes on and it lists the first firefighter, volunteer firefighters that were in that at the beginning. And one of them was David Lawson Sr., Dave's father. And a gentleman named Clarence Hanson was the first assistant fire chief. And Clarence was a mechanic, had his own auto shop, and then he became also the chief mechanic here at the Lawson Marina. I think it's rather fitting that our first few calls were water related. And May 31st, 1920, a peculiar accident occurred here Monday morning when a young man whose name was not learned and who was riding a motorcycle lost control of his machine near the steamboat pier, which was right out here, and being unable to make the turn in the road at this point, dashed onto the pier at a high speed and was unable to stop. Machine and rider went into the lake off the end of the pier. David Lawson, this would be David Lawson Sr., Dave's dad, proprietor of the nearby boat company, jumped off the dock and dived for the unfortunate man and succeeded in bringing him to shore. The motorcycle was located and after a great deal of hard work was brought to the surface, only slightly damaged. However, but for the prompt action of Mr. Lawson, the young man probably would have drowned. August 24th, 1920. A motorboat owned by Fred E. Palmer caught fire from backfiring in the carburetor this evening at about 6 o'clock and in a short time was a total loss. The boat had just been overhauled by David Lawson. So we got a good incident, we got It caught fire out in the bay, but was run to shore near Dave Lawson's dock under its own power. An alarm of fire was turned in, and the firemen responded, but were unable to check the flames in time to save the boat. It burned to the water's edge. This was the first fire call with the new Bemis Point Fire Company had ever had. The boat was beyond saving when they arrived, but at least they tried. Clark Lord, who drove the new fire truck, started laying hose from the standpipe at the foot of Liberty Street to the burning boat instead of the other way around. And of course, the hose was backward. But we probably couldn't have got the water at the standpipe anyways, because it never did work. It was a good laugh at our expense. That gives you a little taste of early volunteer fire department at Bemis Point. When you talk about how we've developed and how we've come along, Spike Kelderhouse, who was a famous fishing guide on the lake, and Spike had two very large cruisers that he used for trolling for lunch. Spike also would take people out on cruises on his boat, and on July 4th in the evening, there was a really bad wreck at Long Point. Two boats collided. One boat was Donald Bembridge's family and his cruiser, and then Dr. Lewis. And there were a lot of people, and there was a lot of injury, and those boats went down. This was a long while ago, and so that was before the days of any technology Spike had some people on board and some customers, and he had to control them. He knew he had to get in there. They heard the hit, but they couldn't see anything else. And so Spike drive his boat for a period of time and just stop the engines, make everybody be quiet so that they could listen to the people in the water. And he did that until he finally was able to get close enough in that big boat and just by hearing shut the engine off and listening, and finally got over there and he rescued all of those people. It really wasn't until about the last 20 years that we've had our own specialized equipment, really, right there, really, that we started.
Designed for rescue.
Designed for us. And so one of the reasons I think why Bemis never had a boat until relatively recently was because we always had people who would volunteer their boats. And so within the past few years, we started acquiring the specialized equipment. We're always concerned rescue first, then we move to recovery. And that's where it gets ugly, that's where it is a very difficult, gruesome job. And then we move to the third phase of the investigation by the law enforcement. When we started with this, having some of our own specialized equipment, there were a couple departments way back when, back in the 30s, started kind of being leaders on the lake in doing that. And the Lakewood Fire Department was really one of the pioneers in having and modifying boats to do the specialized work that's required. And this picture right here would be one of Lakewood's first boats. And I'm going to ask Billy Reynolds if he wants to comment on this.
Well, this boat's at approximately late 30s Garwood speedboat that the village acquired. The numbers on the bow of the boat, 888. Anybody want to guess what that might have stood for? Back in the 30s and 40s and even some in the 50s, it was the phone number to call the fire department. They weren't able to acquire the funding to restore this antique Garwood. The next slide shows the new boat. An old school teacher who worked for the Chris Craft Corporation, a fellow by the name of Don Eddy. Don was a musician and he was familiar with woodworking, making violins and woodwind type instruments. And Don had a shop in Cheney's Point. And I recollect having seen this boat come out a couple of times after it had seen some repairs in the late 50s, early 60s. And if I could point out again the numbers here on the bow, because the phone exchanges and population grew, the phone number went to 4 digits, 8888. That's how we got to know that. But Pete Dawson's here. Pete, 1961, was one of the last firemen to ride in the old Don Eddy boat. Pete.
I made the last call Lakewood fireboat, rescue boat ever made. It was the only time I made the boat. and it was the last one that went on. There were siren signals. If it was lake rescue, it blew 3 times and quit, then it blew 3 times again. And we had no pagers for home receiver.
Back in those days, for sure.
When it went off, you just ran. And
so it's pretty fair to say that Lakewood Fire Department was a true trendsetter and a leader in lake rescues for the entire lake. The Sheriff's Department came into being and they provided the early boats and took over really for rescuing, having lake rescues on the lake. Well, I could tell just a quick anecdote about lake safety. The year I served as a navigation officer for John Bentley, as a deputy, was a year that nobody drowned. My mindset was educate people, tell them what they're doing wrong, explain to them what they're doing wrong. And these 4 little girls one day off the institution were out in a little rubber raft, air-filled, not solid, no life jackets. I said, you know what, I'm gonna teach these girls a lesson. So I got all 4 of them in my patrol boat, drove them to the dock. It was like the amphitheater emptied out to see what was going on. And I got on the dock and I got all the parents together and I said, you know, I'm bringing your children home alive and not in a body bag. And the tears started flowing and everybody was so grateful. I said, remember the lesson today. I step off the dock into the boat, my pants ripped from knee to knee. It kind of took them very serious. And what he said, we didn't have phones or anything, so I had a radio, the Lakewood Police Department, to go to my house, get an extra pair of pants, bring me the aqua. My thought was, let's teach safety and make it safe out here.
Another example in Bemis Fire Department, when the bridge was being built at the end, they donated their work boat. We used that a lot on calls, but that started it with Bemis Fire Department. And then we've moved on to some pretty exotic looking craft. And this is our Boston whaler that's specifically designed for rescue work. The hull, the design, everything about the boat. It's an outboard work engine on it, but that is designed specifically for rescue work. There is our airboat. 350 horsepower Corvette engine that propels this airplane, prop propeller. And on the bottom of this boat, this is 20 foot, I believe, and on the bottom of the boat is kind of like space age plastic, and it's thick, very durable plastic. If they wanted to, if they had to, well, we've done it. You can drive it right down the road. We use this primarily when the ice is bad. They're training here with their protection suits, Mustang suits, and whatever. But it's saved a lot of lives, and it saved a lot of firefighters' lives. I really believe it. We used to be horrible. We used to think that somebody was through the ice, we'd go out, tie ropes around us, and we'd carry ladders out there, and slide ladders out, trying to get to people. We'll talk about in a few minutes about how we used to do it the hard way now. So here's another one. This is where Don M. our fire department, Woodville, comes into play. And they have what's called a hovercraft. And it has a propeller here that pushes the boat forward, but it rides on a cushion of air. That concludes my end at this point. And Daryl's going to take over and talk to us about it.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation to be here and talk to you tonight. Just so you're aware of it, I've had a couple of comments about what the undersheriff actually is. I'm not the custodian of the jail. The sheriff's department is one of our early signs with our navigation patrol. Going back to, as John mentioned earlier, 75, 80 years ago, part of the problem with rescues was they weren't offering rescues because we never got notification of anybody being in trouble. Might be a boat drifting ashore, and maybe if you were really lucky, it was somebody onshore that saw the incident take place. That compared to today's world where almost all of our calls now are coming in by cell phone. Not only are they coming in by cell phone, but a lot of times they're coming in actually off the vessel. And with that cell phone signal going in our 911 center, we can triangulate a location through the cell technology close enough that we've got a starting point. And that's something that we haven't had until just recently. With that, along with the fact that our navigation deputies are trained to set up what we call lines of drift. When that first responding boat gets there, what we try to do is get that victim boat or the victim's location anchored. Throw a buoy, do anything that we can to at least try to go back to the original location that we were called to. Then we allow that boat to drift, and it seems like needless time being wasted, but when that boat drifts for a couple of minutes, we drop a buoy. Drifts another few minutes, we drop a buoy. That gives us a line of sight back to the original location. So if our first spot was 10 minutes after the call, 20 minutes after the call, we can at least go back to that first buoy and we're searching the zero path instead of having a whole lake in front of us. So a lot of things like that have really helped. We certainly have gained technology, we've gained training. Just to give you a little bit of history here of what the Sheriff's Department has done, that was our contribution in 1947. That boat, motor, and trailer was $900. It was partially gifted by the Deputy Sheriff's Association. Pretty elaborate rescue craft at the time, but in today's world it wouldn't mean a whole lot. So in 1960, the state legislature gave jurisdiction of navigable waterways throughout the state to the Sheriff's Departments that were geographically located where those waterways were. And when that happened, Sheriff Charlie McCluskey was the sheriff at the time. We jumped into the middle of that. We bought 5 boats, and they were all old wooden hull, most of them inboards, and 1 jet boat. We hired 6 part-time special deputies, paid them $80 a week for the 12-week season. We gave them 12 hours of training, and we sent them out there. That's the original crew there. Some of you might remember some of these fellows. Andy Travis is in this mix, and some of you knew Andy. He was a teacher when I was in school. So that was one of the original 5 boats and the original 6 fellows that we had operating them. This is Sheriff Merle Campaign. He took office in 1966, and you can see some of the faces are the same there in the boat. And that was a Century Raven, one of the original patrol boats that we had. Sheriff John Bentley was in office when he learned somehow of this drug forfeiture from Florida. This was a cigarette boat, and it had twin outdrives, huge V8 engines in them. The problem was the boat we put on Chautauqua Lake, and to get it up on plane, you were at the other end of the lake by the time you had to slow down, otherwise you couldn't get out of the water. So it was a good idea. It didn't cost us anything originally. It cost us a lot of gas. This boat was purchased in 2009. After 9/11, a lot of funding was made available through Homeland Security, and because of our position right on the U.S.-Canadian border with Lake Erie virtually unprotected, the federal government made a lot of border security money available in grants. So we were able to buy this. This is a 32-foot Brunswick whaler, actually, and we keep that boat on Lake Erie all the time. It's a really stable boat. I don't know if you could capsize it. It goes about 60 miles an hour plus, even in rough seas. It doesn't have much in the way of creature comforts in that cabin, but if you've got to go somewhere quick and get something done, it definitely does the job, and we can haul half the dive team out. Back in 2004, the state started actually providing boats to the localities to use. This was a Sea Swirl. That was the first one they gave to us. It was kind of a nice little workboat. The top that's on it is just like a kite when the wind catches it broadside. So it blew it around a lot, and it was a little tougher to handle. We never did anything except provide the maintenance on it, and then we turned it over to the state, and they gave us another one. This is one of the current boats that we're using. If none of you are familiar with where our operations base is right now, we have a small shack on this end of Long Point State Park right now in the marina parking lot, and we've got this dock down there. That's our office there to the left side. We keep 3 boats down there generally all the time. We probably could get by with 2, but we've almost always got 1 pulled out of the water to go for routine service. This is another thing that our navigation guys do. A lot of times in the summer they provide a lot of information to youth groups, scouts, campers, conservation field days. They also come down here to the Lawson Center, provide motor safety classes. So they do a lot more than just patrol. In 1994, something happened in this county that really kind of changed the complexion of water rescue. Up until that time, in '73, I think, Sheriff Benton created a dive team in the Sheriff's Office. We had 5 divers, but the way we did things back then, prior to the early '80s, was pretty much they called the Sheriff's divers in when somebody drowned and they weren't having any luck looking for them. We would look for them for a little while, and if we ran our course, ran out of air, got tired, they called the drag hooks in. We'd work directional, we'd work squares, grid patterns. It was very ineffective. In the early '80s, a lot of different people started to pioneer using tethered searches. And by that, we went to one diver, we put the diver on a tether line that was connected to a search operator, and that guy guided the diver. That way he knew where the diver was going. We used line signals to turn him at certain points. We moved him back and forth. And we searched in an area that we knew the concentration of success was going to be as good as we could get. We mentioned before that the technology continues to evolve and continues to change. We made that jump from kind of mindless searching without really having an idea where our objective was, and our resources limited us so much, because if we put a diver in the water, it's a rescue scenario. Even if we have good location, good techniques, good people doing the operation, and very effective searches, a diver burns out pretty fast. This is a Fisher side scan sonar. When we would dive, we could dive the width of that diver, pretty much, what he could feel with his hands. So you had about a 5-foot reach. If you put drag boats in the water, a set of drags was maybe 6, maybe 8 feet. If you strung half a dozen boats together, you get 30 or 40 feet, possibly. And it was real unexact science, because the drags would drift back and forth and wouldn't cover the same area as equally as they should. It runs like a little submarine towed by the boat. It runs a few feet off the bottom, and we look for what we call a sweet spot, so that it's reading a very wide area to the sides in relation to your victim, and it's not missing a big area underneath. If you get too shallow, you start to hit the bottom. If you get too far off the bottom, because the side scan comes out at an angle, you can miss what's right under it. But when the operator knows what he's doing, this will search about 30 meters on either side of the fish. So that is the way of the future. And that is the most recent patch. Some of the younger guys, the torch is being passed. They weren't satisfied with the old one. So they developed the new one last year, and that's okay. That's all part of it. But that's about all I've got. Unless someone has some questions, we'd be happy to answer. We've got the displays outside.